contrasts the darkness from the light. It contrasts the evil and the destruction and the horror that happened during the Holocaust versus the light, the love, the courage, the perseverance, and especially the faith my parents had.
Insight and awareness, spiritual explorer. Soul intuitive, emotional and spiritual mentor and award-winning author, Lorraine Nylon.
Welcome explorers, I'm your host Lorraine Nylon and I want to thank you for being part of the adventure. Today our guest is Michael Ruskin and I'm very excited for him to be here with us. He's a writer, researcher and he's wrote a beautiful book in honour of his father and mother, and I'm going to get him to tell us all about it, but it's called The Vow, A Love Story and the Holocaust. So thank you, Michael, for being part of the podcast.
Thank you for letting me be here, Lorraine. Thank you.
My pleasure. So can you tell us, why is this book important for us to read and what made you write it?
Okay, so as I say on my presentations, this is a spiritual book for the most part. It contrasts the darkness from the light. It contrasts the evil and the destruction and the horror that happened during the Holocaust versus the light, the love, the courage, the perseverance, and especially the faith my parents had to survive during the Holocaust. They came from the country of Lithuania, where almost 97% of the Jewish population of that country were exterminated by the Nazis as well as their collaborators. And when you consider almost 97% perished during 4 years of occupation of Lithuania, that both my mother and father lived, they had a message they wanted to leave for humanity, which was they went inside of themselves and tapped in to the love, the faith, the courage to survive. That's the only way they would have made it through.
Yeah, and because it's one of those things, unless you've lived it, you don't really understand it. We can have some form of what we think it would be like and what we think we would do in that situation, but until you're living it, you wouldn't know.
I couldn't even begin to think what it must have been like. We'll go into it a little bit later, but my mother lost a 3.5-year-old daughter, my sister, in 1944. And only 3 months later, they were shipped to separate concentration camps. And they didn't see each other for nearly 9 months, not even knowing if the other one was still alive. This is only 3 months after my sister Rose passed away through the hands of the Nazis.
Oh, God, unbelievable.
It's unbelievable, truly.
Yeah, it is. And what sort of lessons do you think they wanted us to understand? What does their life give us an example of?
Well, they wanted us to really understand that regardless of the challenges and the hardship and the turmoil that we face in our lives, that if we go within, that we have the eternal human spirit in each one of us. It's an innate quality that God has given us. And if we can tap into that part, there is nothing that we cannot do. If it wasn't for the feeling that they knew that their love would keep them together and their strong faith that they would make it through. And that's what I believe they wanted to leave humanity. And that is one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because my parents rarely ever spoke about what happened. This is a legacy I wanted to leave, especially when I go, and obviously for them. But this is something that I knew was very, very important for people to understand, that if they had survived such horrors and such death and destruction that was all around them, and they were able to survive, then we can do the same thing regardless of what the circumstances are.
Yeah, true. And so when they talked about the war, what sort of conversations would they have? I know they would have limited them, but what sort of things did they make sure that you understood?
They rarely ever spoke about their experiences. When they did speak, my mother said only one time that she had a daughter, and I never really pursued it because it would have been very difficult for her to have to come back with answers. I didn't want to open up that wound. A lot of the information I got when we were sitting in the den and watching World at War, which is a documentary that they would have every week on TV. And while I was watching, and my parents were sitting on the sofa with me watching, I had a hard time connecting what I was seeing on the TV to the fact that these two people alongside of me was actually in that kind of situation. They rarely ever spoke about it. My father once in a while would raise the issue of with the Americans liberating Dachau, and he talked about that for a little while. And my mother talked a little bit about how they met after the war. Most of my information, Lorraine, was found in documents that I found in my father's night table in 1993 after he had passed away. And when I
Right.
and when I ended up going over to the condo in Miami Beach and I started rearranging the condo because we were selling the unit, my brother and I found these documents in his night table. And this was late September of 1993. And when I went in, I opened up the folder and I started reading all these testimonies they were giving to the doctors and the attorneys that they were petitioning the German courts in 1964, that they were petitioning the courts for reparations that my mother and father lost both sides of their family and my daughter. A lot of that information that were in those documents I never read before. And those documents are actually in the book. So anybody who
Right.
gets the book will be able to go in there and see exactly what I saw that night back in 1993.
And how did it make you feel when you were reading these documents?
It was horrific. I mean, I just sat there. I remember this distinctly, sitting there on his bed at 11 o'clock at night, just going through pages and pages of the documents, and my heart fell into my feet. It was horrible what I read, and they went into detail about what happened.
Yeah.
And these were things I did not know until I read it that night. So it was just horrifying. So after that night, I told my brother who was there with me, because this is what we already had the funeral and we're getting ready to put the condo on the market. I told him about it, and he didn't see. I mean, he kind of reacted in a way, but he was kind of stoic about it. But I took those documents with me and I brought them home. But it was years later until I wrote the book. Years
Right.
later, it was
And,
just too hard. Go ahead.
oh, sorry. My brain's sort of going because it's like I can I remember when my father died, and one of the things that you actually become a little bit shocked on is that you start hearing stories about them before you were even born, and all of a sudden you realize that your parents had this life before you. You intellectually know that, but when you start hearing the stories, did it put it into perspective, some of the things that you seen for them, and then why they were so quiet about what they had
Yeah.
experienced? Yeah.
Well, they had certain behavior patterns were quite unusual for most of us. So they ate very fast at the dinner table because they didn't have a lot of food. And so as a very young child, I would start eating fast like they do. And to this day, I still eat too fast. Um, so that's one situation. They would, very interesting. My mother would always tell me, don't tell anyone in the neighborhood we're refugees. They did not want people to know. Of course, their accents were so heavy, how could you not know they were refugees? They had such a heavy, heavy European accent. Um, a little bit of a funny piece is that every week they would go grocery shopping, and they would always come home with rolls and rolls of toilet paper.
All
And I
right.
understand when you opened up the closet door in my house, there was toilet paper from the ceiling down to the floor, 5 rows deep. And every time they came back with more and more, and I couldn't, obviously, we know now there was nothing like that in the camps. But
Yeah.
they always, when they went groceries, they always had to get toilet paper.
There you
Uh,
go.
and then later on, my brother and I tried to tape them on a recorder. They refused to do that, and I can understand why. And also, I want to let you know that the documents I found are now at the Holocaust Museum in Washington in their
All
library.
right.
So
Yeah.
people will go there and actually read the documents that I sent them years ago. So it's there in the library.
Very
But their,
good.
their behavior was a little bit suspicious if you weren't Jewish. They hung around with a lot of local refugee Jewish people. Um, they were very loving people. My mother was one of nine children, six girls and three boys. My grandfather was a rabbi, and he was a very strict conservative rabbi, and my mother was raised in that kind of family. On the other hand, I was more spiritual, and I really, I'm sure they would have wanted me to be a little bit more observant. But an American kid born in Brooklyn, New York, hanging around playing baseball, and I mean, it was like it was a cultural thing, and it was an age thing. It was I had a difficult time resonating with that past because it was, first of all, so difficult to even wrap my head around what they went through. What's interesting is I never really acknowledged how special they were until they passed away, Lorraine. I
Oh.
mean, I just didn't give it much thought. But now that they're gone and I did all this research, these were two very special souls that came back to this planet. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book.
Oh, yeah, and isn't that fascinating? Is that that happens so often, is we don't really realize somebody's story. I always say everyone's got an interesting story. They only look at little bits of it, and when you put it all together, it's a very interesting story. So how has it impacted your spirituality and how you feel about life and love?
Well, first of all, I want you to know that I couldn't have written this book unless they were with me in the room.
Mhm.
It took me about 2 years, and during that time, I'm telling Lorraine, there were times I was actually on my computer typing away, and I could hear them in my ears. That my fingers almost had a mind of its own, that they were flying across the keyboard. And the next morning I would wake up and I could not believe I came up with words that were not mine, it was theirs. And I tell people this is their book, their story. I'm only here to speak for them, but this is not my book, this is their book. But yeah, love to me is why we're here. Relationships are why we're here. Is to connect with other people. I believe we're all one soul. Our souls are very connected, and and to respect each other and to respect ourselves are very, very important. And love is what it's all about. And they exemplified that in their lives. They had a really great marriage. Um, they obviously they loved each other so much that it took my father almost 3 months to find her after. And this goes into the book. He In my book, I there's a chapter called The Mission. And my father actually had to travel through three different countries over almost 3 months looking for my mother in what they called displacement camps, where after the war, the refugees would go to displacement camps throughout Europe, waiting to be waiting for immigration to take them either to Israel, to the United States, to South America, to England. And my father would stop along the way at these displacement camps as he was going from Germany back to Lithuania because they made a vow. That's the story of the book, the vow, a love story in the Holocaust. They made a vow before they were put on the trains that if either one were to live, they were to go back to where they first met 5 years earlier to see if the other one was still alive. And so my father kept his vow and he traveled through all these countries. And of course, he met up. I don't want to go into a lot of detail because then I'll ruin the story, but they ended up meeting months later, and it was an incredible reunion. That's the one thing my mother mentioned about when she first saw my father after she hadn't seen him in 9 months, and she had typhus fever at the time, that she almost died. And I think she would have died if she hadn't seen my father.
There you
But she
go.
thought my father was an angel. She looked up at him. She goes, David, are we in heaven? She thought my father was coming back to take her to heaven, and she was just hallucinating, but she was only hours away from death. It's,
There
it's
you
an incredible story. It's all in the book.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds fascinating. So what do you think humanity needs to acknowledge and understand for us to evolve?
Well, first of all, I don't want to start with a negative point, but what happened during the Holocaust, Lorraine, can happen again.
Mm.
Uh, I think there are people out there that are trying to separate us and keep us apart. I need, and most of us need to really educate people that we have to push back because a lot of people try to separate us so they can conquer, separate us and conquer. The love, as I said before, the love is the most important thing that people need to understand. And it comes from ourselves to ourselves first. We have nothing to give if we don't have the love for ourselves. And we also have to feel a respect for one another. And we also have to educate people about things that happened in the past that could repeat itself. My target audience are the college children and the college kids and the high school kids. A lot of people don't even know what the word Holocaust means in that generation. And I feel it's my responsibility to make sure they understand that it can certainly happen again. And we have to be very much vigilant about what is going on day to day.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And it is, like when we look at Hitler and what the Nazis did, they did nothing new. They just did it all in one hit. But throughout history, those things had already occurred. And as we've moved forward, we can see that some of them are still occurring. So
Right.
we have this when we're in our nice, safe areas, we feel that it's history, but it's not. There's a lot of things like that still happening.
Oh
So
yeah, I think Hitler was trying to separate people by their blood in the sense that they looked at different races as inferior to their own, whether it was the Jews, the Catholics, I mean, all across the board, they were trying to make them feel that the Aryans were the master race. And the way they would do that, it was make everybody feel insignificant, that they were just bringing society down, and they had to get rid of those people to really what Hitler wanted to do was to actually rule the world. And so he would put people in their place. And anti-Semitism happened way before Germany. It happened centuries through Russia and other countries because the Jewish people a lot of them tend to speak a different language. They dress differently. A lot of this is prejudice. There's people who believe that the Jews were responsible for the killing of Christ, and it is debunked years later. But they were trying to separate them, and they were the perfect scapegoat for so many generations of those that just wanted to push them aside. And then after World War One, when Hitler believed that they lost World War One because of the Jews and the communists, they pointed the finger that this would never have happened because after World War One, Germany went into severe depression, and Hitler had a stage, and they blamed the Jews for all the turmoil and all the difficulty they were having in Germany between World War One and World War Two. And by the
yeah,
way, there were so many Jews that fought on the side of the Germans during World War One, and they thought they would never be put into a camp. They were people who believed that they stood up for the German country, and here they were all also exterminated, even though they were fighting in the war in World War One as Jews and soldiers.
yeah. When you
So,
look, when you look at things like that, it makes you, you shake your head. I always found it odd that here's this guy, dark haired, short, little mustache, and he's telling everyone that the blonde haired, blue eyes are the superior race. And it was like, it's not even you. You know what I mean? Like you can punch holes through his. It
oh,
doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
Lorraine, it was incredible. I mean, Hitler's not even Aryan. He was not Aryan. And they were also there's rumors that his grandmother was Jewish.
I'd believe it.
I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up.
No, you can't. You cannot make this stuff up.
But
It's
he's not an Aryan. He's not German. He's not an Aryan. I said, but he wants everybody else to follow what he believed the Aryans were entitled to be the rulers of the world. So
yeah, and it's interesting how human nature, like when we're under threat, we align with the bullies. You see it in kindergartens, you see it in world stages. As the bully becomes the one with the power, and then no one knows how to deal with the bully.
right.
So
They call it the Stockholm syndrome, and it's also what they call sheeple. The people there's like sheep; they follow the crowd, and if you want to stand up against them, then you're putting yourself in jeopardy. But yeah, that's what happens. You have one leader, and they think for you. You don't think for yourself. You let them think for you, and then you follow them, and that's why so many people died. No,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah, it's very sad. And so when you're looking back, does it and you're correlating where the world is today, are you fearful or are you hopeful?
no. Well, I guess I'm a combination of both. I think I still believe in humanity, but what's going on with the Holocaust deniers. There's a lot of people out there that said the Holocaust never happened. I run into that even to this day sometimes, that they say it was all manufactured. There's a lot of anti-Semitism that's going around. It's reaching epidemic proportions again. They just want to find someone to blame so they can then try to take over politically, economically. So we got to be vigilant. But I believe in the end, as I say, the light always outshines anything else, and it will and transcends the darkness. And I believe in the humanity, and I believe we're all good people. Except there are people out there that come from an evil place, and we got to be very vigilant. That will never go away. I don't believe, because
Yeah.
there's still a lot of killing and hatred going on to this day. That hasn't stopped.
No. Actually, it's funny because I in 1999, which is going back a bit, I backpacked around Europe and I went to Dachau concentration camp.
Yeah, that's my father was. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And it was funny because it was a particular day that, they had the most visitors they've ever had and all the rest of it. So they crammed us all into the sleeping quarters. And there was an ex-American soldier who was doing the talk. And we're all, we're stuck in there like sardines. And everyone started complaining and it was hot and everyone's complaining and he let them go. He just, he was listening to their complaints and the mumbling and he said, "Oh, by the way, there's another 50% of what's here today that would have been in this room." So everyone went quiet. And then and then you'd seen people leave and he said, "Oh, by the way, the people that were actually here, they didn't have the option to do that." And he kind of put our reactions and he would explain which I thought was brilliant. I really enjoyed his lecture. And then we were walking and we seen the gas ovens and he said that they were always pulling out Nazi symbols. It could be on rocks, it could be on paper, so they were always pulling it out. And he said, "But you never see anybody do it." But and he said, so it's still available, not available, but people still are responding the same way. And when you're walking around, you can feel the stillness in the air because a major trauma has occurred. And he pointed out different photos to go and see, and he'd say that one with the woman holding her little 4-year-old, they're heading to the gas chambers. Right? The mother knows it, the daughter doesn't. And he put these photos in perspective. And then the next day we went to another tourist destination and there was a Indian family and the grandfather was in a wheelchair. So they were on the other side of the road and they were getting bussed up to where we were going and we had to wait, so they had a special area for disabled. And then there was this American yelling out across the road to this person, "How come you're getting special treatment?" And then started calling them all these different names. And I was like, "Oh my God." So I turned around and said something and said, like, "Geez, you can see he's in a wheelchair, mate. What are you doing?" And then someone come along and grabbed my elbow and pulled me back and said, "Stop causing trouble." I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I was like, hang on, he's yelling at these people across, and I thought, oh, here is an example. And I just seen yesterday where this can go. And it always stayed with me. It always, the importance of not forgetting our humanity.
Exactly. I mean, it's a very sensitive area, and but we do have to speak up. But sometimes it can get us into a little bit of a skirmish. But you can't let people bully you. And bullying is, in the school system now, that's what you're seeing, a lot of these bullies, and it's affecting the children.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
the
Yeah.
hardest the hardest chapter for me, Lorraine, to write was Death of Innocence, my chapter 6, when my sister was taken away by the SS when my mom and my sister were underneath the floorboard of their apartment. It was a very,
Right.
very dramatic and very hard chapter to read. In the book, there's a picture of a little girl who actually was in the same place at the same time, and she was the same age as my sister. Uh, the event was called Kindernacht. It was a children's action. And let me just go a little bit. When they went into the ghetto, and a lot of my book takes place in the Kovna ghetto, Kaunas, Lithuania, and they would go raids into the apartment buildings and take clothes and appliances, jewelry off your fingers. And if you had any type of complaints, they would come and beat you or take you into custody and take you to the extermination chamber in Kovna. One of the last raids of the apartment were the children. The Germans came in to take the kids under 16 years old, and it was called, as I said, the Kindergarten. 1,600 children were exterminated within 2 days. One was my sister, and one was this little girl in my book who was exactly the same age and the same place as my sister, and she represents the 1,600 kids who were killed over a 2 day period. It was horrendous. And when you see the photos in my book, and there was only one photo that's a little bit graphic, all the rest are just photos of people.
Mm.
It's heartbreaking to look at these photos of children, to think that anyone could take a life of anyone, especially someone who's 3 or 4 years old and so innocent. It's
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah. And I think that's the brilliance of the type of book that you've wrote, is that it takes it away from being this collective, okay, the Jews, where we go, okay, that we separate ourselves when we put a label on it. But when we see a photo of a little girl, or when we see a family portrait, and we go, okay, none of them survived, all of a sudden the story becomes about people and
Correct.
people like us, you know. So
Correct.
it makes a big difference.
Yeah, when you think that you're talking 6 million, 7 million Jews, whatever it was a number, it's just a number. But when you break it down to individual people, that's why my book is so compelling, is that I break it down to people understand what was it like as two people who fell in love before Germany entered the war. And then then I went through the experiences of what happened to them during the war. This breaks it down to two people because of their love and their faith and their courage. It really brings it home. It's not
Yeah.
like saying, well, there's 6 million. Now I'm talking about only two people, and I really bring it home as to what they were feeling.
Yeah, and when you hear the stories, even those people that do unbelievable kindnesses and put themselves at risk to hold on to their own humanity, to really serve others and trying to keep them safe, and there's hundreds of stories like that. Then there's something within us that reacts to that. It's our
Correct.
soul knowing that that person stayed true to their soul in
Correct.
that
So you can
experience.
imagine a lot of people who went through the war, especially the Holocaust, started not even believing that there was a God.
Yeah, well, you could see why.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying. I mean, to still
yeah.
have faith even after all that, you've got to give people credit that they still believe that God is good. And
Yeah, well,
so,
I always find it interesting because we take away, we know we've got free will down here, and
right,
then we go, "Oh, God, let this happen." No, we've got free will.
correct,
We as humanity to me is when we recognize that we are souls within a physical body, and mankind is when we forget we're souls and we just operate from our lowest type of energy, so greed
correct,
and the desire for power. So when we're operating from mankind, we're making these kind of decisions that affects humanity, the rest of us that are trying to hold to the truth of our souls. And it's when we have a world that operates from humanity, then we'll see the great evolutionary changes that we all hope will happen, but we will make them. Like that's what
well,
we're meant to do. Yeah, that's
right.
evolution. Yeah.
I
Whether
I
we
don't believe there's separation. I think people are all connected to each other. And when you realize that we're all connected, you realize you want to treat people the way you want to be treated, and you want to love like that you want to love. So we're all connected like that. And people
yeah.
have this illusion that we're all separate. We're not separate. We're all together.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by humanity. Your
Yeah,
understanding is humanity. When we want to be separate and we want to, put another race down or put another belief system down and not see the person, not see the soul, then we're operating from what I refer to as mankind energy. So
right.
just because we operate from just that selfishness within ourselves, power, control, greed, all those kind of things. So, which means we're trying to feed a hole within ourselves when we're operating from there because we've forgotten that we're souls in a physical body. So it goes around in circles. But yeah,
That,
and it
that's usually brought about because of your own insecurities.
for
If you really
sure.
feel, your insecurities bring that out, and you're going to try to be egoic and try to say I'm better than you, and that's not the way that's not the way it works.
No, no. No, but it's fascinating how we've got a whole history, a world history of us fighting against reality and for fighting against our equality with all souls to have such conflict. And it doesn't really serve the people well. I'm sure there's
Correct.
other people that make a lot of money out of it and all the rest of it that they like it and that feed on power. But the people in general, none of us get the benefits of it at all.
And now,
Mm.
especially now, Lorraine, with what's going on here in the United States and all over, I mean, there's so much polarity here, with all the politics and everything else that's going on in the world. There's a lot of separation going on between them and us, and but I think in the end, you're right. In the end, we will be like a community, a world community, but we're going to have to get through this to get to the other side.
Yeah, and I think the way to have a world community is really respect the uniqueness and the value that all these differences and diversity
Yes. Yep.
bring to the world and celebrate that,
That's right.
and yeah, and then because we can learn a lot from each other, but it's,
Correct.
I would say, think of yourself as you're a individual spark within a collective, and whether you want to, look at it as the collective of consciousness or truth or God's
Right.
playground. You're a unique spark within that, and the same as you're a unique spark within living on Earth
Correct.
and all that entails.
As I said, the spirituality of this book, and it gets lost. They think, oh, it's about the Holocaust. It's about this is about a spiritual experience that happened to my parents, and the Holocaust is just the cause of how they exemplified, transcended the darkness to get to the other side. And as I said, if you could look at my parents as people who taught what it's like to really love each other and the power of the strength of the human spirit, that's all I would want my audience to leave of my presentation with, that they understand the strength of your own human spirit.
That's a
That
that's
the,
a that's brilliant. Actually, that's brilliant. That's a beautiful sum up. I love
right.
that. Time to play flip the book. So, would you like to play an intuitive game where there's three books and you can pick one, two, or three? Which book would you like?
3.
Three. Okay, that's what I refer to as the big book. 1 to 430 pages to pick.
I'll take um, I'll take 77.
So that is actually a picture. There we go. Can you see that man sitting on
Yes, I
his
do.
books?
Yep.
Right. So there's two paragraphs. Do you want the first one or the second one?
I'll take the first one.
Okay. So it's these are archetypes. So
Hmm.
this is the intellectual. You are very judgmental in the way you think, constantly analyzing, justifying, and judging if you are right, therefore superior. You confuse your judgment for reality. and class your judgment as an authority over truth. You use what you class as knowledge to validate your arrogance. Your inability to trust your soul's consciousness and truth has you searching for information to intellectually justify overriding the insecurity you feel by abandoning truth. Truth is felt, but you want to only operate in what you consider as proven knowledge, presuming you can control life with your black and white judgment. I think that sums up what we've been talking about in your book, the dark
Correct.
side. Yeah,
Correct. Very well said. Yeah.
yeah. What did it make you feel?
But I don't want to be like that.
Good answer.
No, I don't want to be like that. No, I'm just the opposite. But I mean, that's it. That's what we're up against. That description is what's out there. I mean,
Yeah, it is.
not all of us, but there's a good number that are like that, and that
Yeah,
separates.
yeah, and it's easy to fall into that judgment trap. Like
No,
because
no.
yeah, if you're not letting yourself realize that even your understanding of truth and your own spirituality is going to keep moving. So, to jump on a belief system and then use it as a judgment to make someone less than you, or to give yourself the righteous self permission to treat someone as if they're less than you, then you are so far away from truth that it's scary.
You got to give them love, Lorraine. That same people that are trying to be better, that when they realize that when they meet people like that, give them love.
That's a
And that's what they should be feeling and giving, rather than feeling that they're different or they're lesser than you are.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
No, it
But eventually
doesn't.
they'll learn. No, but
Yeah.
they'll learn.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I always say humanity, humans, we're slow learners.
we are. Yeah,
Yeah.
we are. That's why personally I believe our souls who are here to learn, and then we learn from that. And for me, I believe we come back and apply that knowledge to our next life. But then, believe it or not, there's a number of what they call Hasidic Jews, very strict Jews that believe in reincarnation, astrology, and all that stuff. And it's shocking, but it is true that they think that Jewish people believe in the Old Testament and all that. But there's a section of the Jewish faith that also believe in what I just mentioned.
All right. There you
So
go. What do you think was the greatest lesson that you learned from writing your book? What did you learn personally?
the importance of having strength to keep going, even against the darkest moments in one's life. To love, to really feel caring and love for other people. It's given me a certain softness now that I really feel for people who have problems or issues. I have a lot of compassion that I didn't have before.
Oh,
Um,
that's
and
good.
so it's kind of softened me a lot as I'm getting older. And I love people. My prayer every night is I don't want anyone to be lonely. I think loneliness is horrible. And it really pains me to see there's a lot of lonely people out there. I see a lot of people that are just not connecting with each other. And
Yeah,
so I
true.
pray every night that I hope people will really learn to love one another and to bond with them rather than
Yeah.
live separately.
Yeah, that's it. Well, that's a good thing to realize that, that's a good result for you.
Right. It is.
Yeah, yeah. And I always think, remember self-compassion as well, because you've got to be able to sit with yourself in those dark moments and be your own nurturer as well as
Right.
nurturing others. Yeah,
And
beautiful.
keep in mind that, my parents really, my parents really didn't teach that because they were so shut down emotionally that if they could feel what I'm saying now, they would have a very difficult time, because the only way they could have survived, Lorraine, is by shutting those emotions down. My parents rarely ever hugged me or kissed me as a child, never said I love you. They just weren't capable of doing those kinds of things because of what had gone through with my sister being taken. So I had to learn all this through the years as I got older.
Yeah, yeah, and that's quite common when lots of different types of trauma is they shut down, but then it affects the next generation
Right.
because yeah, so we keep perpetuating the trauma response in a way.
Right.
So
And, it's in our DNA. So it didn't just happen with my parents, Lorraine. This happened generations before them. My family all comes from Russia, Lithuania, Poland. They all had persecution in their lives. That DNA is passed down from one generation to the other. Of course, it's left with me because I'm the last surviving member of my family. Once I
mhm.
go, this book would never have been written. I was the last. That's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I wanted people to know before I go, then unless I wrote the book, people would never know who these people were. That was
Yeah,
one of the reasons I wrote the book. So
yeah, beautiful story. Well, it's really a recount, isn't it? It's a recount of
yeah,
somebody's life. So
exactly. It's a biography. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, thank you, Michael. I've enjoyed the conversation.
Same here. Thank you very much, Lorraine.